I briefly mentioned that there was some kind of issue of the son preferences and the missing girls in some of the countries. And these two papers, I didn't assign these papers in the lecture or in this course, but briefly, evidence for the incipient decline of numbers in missing girls in China and India, which means the missing girls. Who could have born? Who could have born without the son preferences or the cultural issues, but because of the son preferences, there were the selective abortion and some kind of indifferent parenting. Which means for the young girls, they didn't feed a lot and they didn't go to the hospital to check up. So eventually, the girls were more likely to die in the young age. And missing girls in China and only the consequences of the one-child policy. And there are many of the arguments, but these were some issues we had with that. So the South Korea also, some of the East Asian countries with the Confucianism culture, they all had a very strong son preferences. So can we support this argument based on the data? Maybe. Trend in sex ratio at birth, South Korea and China. So these are, so if we don't calculate, we multiply 100, and these are some of the 1 point something, it means that there were 1.2 boys per one woman. So I will not ask in this way in the weekly quizzes or the midterm or the final exam, but anyway, you can interpret that based on the sex ratio at birth. So as we can see, the 1.0 means there are the 1 newborn boys per 1 newborn the girl, which means there was the survivability will be very same. But after some time, in China, sex ratio is very, very high, which means there are the larger number of the boys compared with the girls in China. So these are trends in the sex ratio, mortality, the higher mortality in the male, higher mortality. Sorry about that. And there is a higher sex ratio, 1.1 something, and more mortality and mortality. There are the high levels of the mortality of the sex ratio. So if MF is more than 1, there are more on the male children deaths. So in many cases, the numbers are below 1, right? Below 1, which means that there were the higher chances of the deaths of the girls. So female children disadvantage in the survival, which means there were more and more higher rate of the deaths in less than 1 year old, 1 through 4 years old, and 5 years old. So these are not very natural because in biology, the girls would have the higher survivability. Okay, the missing girls, and there are its phenomena, but these are the two sophisticated statistical methods, so I will not cover that in the lecture and on video. But anyway, year of birth, the first birth and the second birth and the third birth, there will be the decrease fractions of male. So there are some the decreases of the fractions of male because if they have the more and more in opposite. The third, if there's first birth, they would not have the very strong some preferences because they could have the second or the third baby. But if they have the third baby, they want to keep the males. They want to keep the boys instead of the girls. The selective abortion. These are not the one-to-one phenomena, but selective abortion would be kind of the intervention we can anticipate or we can imagine, because based on the natural selection, this is not very natural. For example, it was very similar. The fraction, which means the proportion of the male babies, were about equal. Only there are a little bit more of the males, but there was very similar in the first birth. But after having the first baby, if there was the second birth, there were the higher proportion of the boys, about 65%, or even about 80% of the newborn babies at the third birth in the family, they were boys. So not very, very natural. So are these biological or discriminational? Which means, are these kind of the very imbalance in the sex ratio biological or discrimination? I would say, so you may think in different ways, but I would say, or many of the scholars said these are the discrimination, or these are based on the discrimination, because in terms of the very natural types of the survivability, they would have, even though there would be some of the differences, but those types of the very strong differences like that, about 78% of the third births, the third live births were only boys, and about the 68%, 7% boys in the second birth. Even the first births were about half and half. So these would be very, very discriminational, right? Sex ratio at birth, 1950 to 2017, we can see that, so these are, okay, so 116. This is very, very high, right? 116 means there were 116 boys out of 100 girls. So altogether, region, this is too tricky. So altogether, add together, and maybe unselect all. So let me just do the China, maybe China, and then the chart. 106, but wow, this skyrocketing, but it goes down and more. All right, this is this is the case of the China, and maybe we can go to the India. Okay, all right, starting from about 105 something, it goes up, and goes down. So getting better, but still on the 109, not very, very natural. So let's see, the South Korea. Very similar, right? Started from the 106, more boys. There were increased a lot, but there was go down and down and more. So there were about a little bit more boys than girls, but not that high, right? How about the United States? All right. See, there were not big differences based on the time. So we can see the some preferences in some of the Asian countries that there was something as discriminational. So biological traits, so it means that the biological differences caused a high death ratio of the girls in the very young ages, hepatitis B rate, and infectious disease or like that. But on these arguments were tested and validated, not very, very true. So we would say the sex-selective abortion, discrimination against the girls, these were very, very big reasons about that. Annual number of missing girls, missing births, excess mortality, were like that. So on these are saying that there were still on the missing girls, and sometimes a number of missing girls like that. And again, one child zone, rest of China, the fraction of the male, which means in one child zone, there were the high levels of the high proportion of the boys. But rest of the China who didn't, where they didn't use the one child policy, which means after having the one child, they could not. So having the second baby or the third baby will be very harshly scolded and will be they will have the very high levels of the fine, and they need to pay very high levels of the penalty. But there were very low levels of the sex ratio imbalances. But so these are some of the differences. So strong son preferences in South Korea. The first child, as you could see, there were no big imbalances. The second child, not a lot. The third child, a lot. So there were very, about 200 in 1990, between the 1990 and 2000, about 200. In the third child, they just wanted to keep when that was their baby was a boy. The fourth child, over 240. So because of the strong son preferences in South Korea, for example, there was a very big cause of the sex ratio imbalance in that point in time. Child mortality by sex. This is Asia, so we can see that child mortality goes down and down, 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 down. But anyway, the rate of the girls. So the child mortality of the girls would be higher than the boys. So that was the graph we could see. Sex ratio birth, again, they're the same, but we can see the differences like that. I think we saw that, but it was showing the comparison. South Korea a lot, but China goes up, 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 and India go up, and so these countries would be more and more. Again, the sex ratio, okay. Expected biological ratio, that is 105 males per 100 female, but these are not very, very biological. Again, the India, strong on son preferences, high sex ratio, more boys, and at birth when the child was not the last one. So there are some types of the sex imbalance. The sex ratio at birth when the child is the last. Then there are the higher chances of keeping the boys. Some kind of the imbalance, the sex rate, the sex differentiated abortion like that. So I'm not sure. So we cannot sure on that what are the methods, but there are many of the sex imbalances in the birth or in their young period of time. Alright, so desperate for a son, how declining fertility as the skewed sex ratio in India. That might be a good resource you can read as the additional force of the study. Alright, so as I told you, today's lecture would be a little bit shorter than the other lectures. And after that, I will post another post to make the additional tips to prepare the weekly quiz, which will be posted in the afternoon of the Friday, today in the Central Time. And I will post another page so that you can prepare about more information about the midterm exam scheduled next Wednesday through Thursday, which means I will post the exam manual at the beginning of the Wednesday. Maybe the beginning. So right after the midnight of the Tuesday, 0:00 a.m. And the due of the midterm exam will be the Thursday night, before the midnight of the Thursday. 11:59. So I will post that in that page. But anyway, this information, more detailed information, will be included in that post. Alright, so likewise and like any time, please let me know if you have any questions so that I can capture what you are struggling with and what can I help you on specific issues. Alright, thank you very much and see you in the videos next week. See ya.